They say talk is cheap, so let's add some value to your voice. It's Targeted Impressions with Scott Cody. So what makes a good story? The English literature professors of the world will say the story needs to have a protagonist, an origin, a conflict, maybe a villain, maybe a happy ending that ties it all together. So with all of that considered, what is the economic story of the greater New Orleans region? Our guest today is the man who has been tasked with literally telling that story. He's Michael Hecht, CEO of GNO Inc., the economic development agency for Southeast Louisiana. And GNO Inc.'s mission is, quote, to create a region with a thriving economy and an excellent quality of life for everyone. Recently, GNO Inc. was named the top economic development organization in the country. That's pretty awesome, Michael. Congratulations on that.
Yeah, Phil, thank you, Scott. It's always nice to take the wins because we're going to take our L's as well. And what we try to do is I call it the cha-cha progress: 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And if we do that long enough, we're going to dance our way to success.
I may steal that. I like that.
Please do.
And you brought home an award yourself. Top CEO was
Yep.
brought to you. That's not something that I'm sure is an easy thing to get. So that kind of recognition, though, starts to open a lot of doors.
Mm-hmm.
And so my question is, as you start trying to, go talk to companies that are not from this area that are possibly looking to invest in this area.
Sure.
How does that conversation start? What do you lead with?
Well, New Orleans is a city and a region that needs no introduction, for better largely, but also for worse. We are without question one of the most recognized and in many ways beloved places on the planet. People love us for our music. They love us for our food. They love us for Mardi Gras. But the challenge is that those are reasons to visit. Those are reasons to come for Jazz Fest. Those are not reasons to necessarily invest your capital or raise your family. And so our greatest challenge is what I would describe as a brand broadening challenge. Those equities of food and music and culture, that holy trinity, those are true. And we should celebrate them because in an increasingly homogenous world, they really do make us stand out. And they're always going to be a positive part of who we are. But fundamentally, we have to get the world, particularly the business world, to think of us as marriage material and not just a hot date.
Okay. So with that said, as the focus on kind of employee development and the retention of those employees has become more a factor,
Mm-hmm.
right? That puts New Orleans into the game a little bit more too, with all the things you just said, right? The fun things, right? But then to your point, what's the biggest objection? Like what is the one thing that you have to constantly talk to the most and try to switch that narrative around?
Right. Well, it depends who you're talking to. So interesting question. So there's no doubt that particularly post-COVID, where the workforce has become more mobile, it's an opportunity for places that can offer a higher quality of life. And so for people looking for what we offer in terms of our culture, it's very attractive. The challenge depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to somebody who is from outside of New Orleans, who you're trying to bring here, the challenge is one of having them understand that there's more going on besides just Mardi Gras and Jazz Fest. You have to explain that we were founded as a maritime port, and we are still a very important trade entrepot building a $2 billion new facility. You have to explain to people that we are the energy transition epicenter for North America, not just in traditional areas like oil and gas, but also in things like offshore wind and biofuels and EV battery production. You have to explain to them that we're a growing tech hub with a lot of gaming companies here like Xbox. So for the external person, it's about broadening a perception which is probably too narrow because we've never done a good job of selling things besides our cultural elements. For people who are on the inside, for natives, it's a different challenge. They know that we have a shipping industry. They know that we have energy. They know what we're doing in healthcare, for example, with Ochsner and LCMC. What their challenges revolve around typically are quality of life challenges. Would have to do with crime, would have to do with infrastructure, and most recently would have to do with cost of living, particularly homeowners insurance. So what we find is that for external people, it's about giving them enough information so that when they're thinking about escaping from a New York or California, New Orleans pops up onto their list along with an Austin or a Nashville or a Tampa or a Charlotte. For locals, it's about basically moderating those negatives, those dissatisfiers, to a significant enough degree that they can justify staying.
Yeah. And so when we talk about the comparison, right? You mentioned a couple of these cities that we do routinely compete for,
Sure.
right? Is there, you talk cost of living, you talk crime. Where is there a city that's kind of edging us out on some of those that we need to fix, right? If we're going to remain in that conversation.
When we look at the competition, there are a few ways to look at this. If you look more historically, if we were placing a bet back in the 70s about which state would really move ahead and which capital city would be the hot capital city for economy and culture, you would have bet on Louisiana and Baton Rouge and not Texas and Austin.
Yeah.
And we know the Austin story. So that's kind of the historical comparison. Over the past 10 years, Nashville is probably an excellent one to look at, because Nashville really now has this brand of being a place with a thriving economy and a vibrant culture, kind of those twin equities that we would like. Most recently, I think an interesting one is Greenville, South Carolina. And the reason that I say that is that it's growing really rapidly. And what's happening is that a lot of people are leaving Atlanta because it's just too congested, too annoying, just too difficult to live there. And they're moving to Greenville because it's a better quality of life. It's easier, it's less expensive. And so then I say, by comparison, people would probably like to get out of Houston if they could. Houston's an amazing story, but it's not really an amazing place to live. I was just there for a week, and it's highly functional, and that's probably the nicest thing that I could say about it. But people are not coming back from Houston and going to New Orleans. And I think the difference comes down to that perception and reality of quality of life, both the challenges, the life safety challenges like crime and flood, both of which we've made some real progress on, but still are there in the perception and to some degree in the reality. But also the cost of living, again, housing cost, homeowners insurance, flood insurance, auto insurance. And so I think that we can look at a Greenville as a mid-sized city that's rapidly growing compared to our region, which is not necessarily attracting immigration, and say, what's the difference?
Yeah, you recently wrote an op-ed kind of addressing the how to offset the fact that we are losing population, and it's going to be we've got to be forward thinking with what we want to do with regards to energy.
That's right.
It is there some reluctance in this area from legacy companies, that are pushing against that? Like, what's the temperature with regards to wind, with regards to all of that?
Well, that's what's most exciting about this. Some of the no, I'd say the greatest support, apart from ideologues and such, for the energy transition and all of the above clean energy strategy is coming from traditional energy people. And I'll give you just two very specific examples. One is, globally, it is the traditional hydrocarbon super majors that are leading in carbon reduction. It's Shell, it's Chevron, it's Exxon, it's Total. These are the companies that have the capital and expertise to really get ahead of the curve, and they actually account for the majority of carbon emissions. So they're certainly not pushing against it. And I talk to them all the time. They're trying to own this transition. But then locally, what you see is that it is folks who have been in the oil and gas industry for decades, building ships, building oil rigs, servicing them, that see a very easy translational opportunity, because the same skills, the same people, the same ports that allow you to build an oil rig can allow you to build and service a wind turbine. So you have like an Edison Schwest down in Cutoff, who now has a multi-$100 million contract with Ørsted, one of the biggest wind developers in the world, out of Denmark. You see companies like Keystone Engineering here in Jefferson Parish that's doing the engineering for the offshore wind installation off the coast of Block Island. You see oil and gas companies getting into carbon capture. So no, actually, the our competitive advantage right now is that our private sector, including traditional energy, and our political leadership, seeing all of the above energy strategy as an economic opportunity first and foremost, with environmental benefits. And so it's really not been politicized so
Yeah, that
far.
that there's not that fight there. Yeah, you're not
It's
having to.
it's about jobs and wealth creation, and pretty much everybody across the political spectrum is for good jobs for good people, and that's fundamentally what this is about.
Yeah. So you might be the first guest that we've had on here. I'm pretty sure you are. That's actually done a TED talk.
Yeah, well,
So
TEDx. It's like the fake TED talk.
no, it's got
You
the
know,
TED on there, man.
yeah,
It's impressive.
it's got the
It's
TED,
on the
right?
line. So prepping for that, I don't think there's anything that probably embodies intentional communication more than prepping for a
Right.
TED talk, right? Take me through. First off, tell us kind of what it was. Give us the elevator pitch on what it was, but then I'm really interested in how you prepped for a TED talk. It's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, no. So that's interesting. So it was a while ago. It was for the 10th anniversary of Katrina, so almost a decade ago. And what I wanted to talk about was this idea of radical resilience, meaning that there was a lot of talk about resilience, and that's all well and good. In New Orleans and Louisiana are certainly resilient, but resilience technically would mean that you get knocked down and you pick yourself back up and you keep walking in the same direction. And what I wanted to talk about is how actually Katrina was not the comeback from Katrina was not about returning to the same trajectory that we were on before, because that was actually a slow downward trajectory. But rather, we came out of that and did some things that fundamentally were altering the trajectory. And that was the radical nature of it. So you can think about education reform. You could think about levy reform, something you and I were talking about off microphone, which is political reform, which saw, a lot of politicians being caught for things that they hadn't been caught for before, but very important. And so I wanted to give people the sense that Katrina, rather than being an event that we simply came back from, it was more like if you had a friend who ate poorly, drank too much, smoked, had a cardiac event that scared the hell out of them but didn't kill them, and now they're doing CrossFit and Zumba and wearing spandex unitards. That was New Orleans, the city in a spandex unitard.
So, and that went over well. That vision in your head kind of goes over well sometimes, depending on who you're putting in the spandex,
and
right?
the unitard. But the prep for it is one, you just watch other TED Talks. They have to be 18 minutes or under, which is a really good amount of time because it forces you to be concise, but gives you enough time to go into detail. And then the other part of it is that it has to be personal. So you have to take a general topic and give it some kind of personal relevance, and that's what gives TED Talks their oomph. And so in my TED Talk, I spoke about a couple of things. I talked about an injury I had playing rugby in college, where I had bad head injury, got a migraine for a year and a half, and how I became a better person having survived that. So I drew that comparison. And then my grandmother, I talked about, who on her deathbed, she'd had a stroke. She couldn't talk. She brought me over to her bed, or called me over, and she wrote me a note, which I couldn't see the first time. But then I was able to read it the second time she wrote it, and it simply said "A for effort." That was kind of her epitaph. And so that was something that, whether it was making it through my personal challenges or us trying to make it through our challenges as a community, has always been animating for me. You can't control a lot of things in life, but you can definitely control getting out of bed, having a cup of coffee, having another one, and then just going for it.
Yeah. Routines, right? Yeah.
Showing up is the thing.
So to keep it in 18 minutes, were you doing this in front of your wife? Did you do who was your audience that you practiced in front of and got feedback?
Yeah, so I think we did two things. I just videotaped myself. Which I find, this is something I learned really early in my career, is that you should videotape yourself doing public speaking. It's difficult to watch yourself public speaking, but it's really good because you'll see the physical and hear the verbal tics that you just wouldn't recognize otherwise. And then I think I practiced in front of my poor wife or my kids a few times to get it down. But then part of it too is that you do want it to have a certain amount of flow and extemporaneous kind of quality. So you don't want to over practice it. Probably the most important thing, if you watch the TED Talks, and this is good for any talking, is the pacing. There is a certain rate that people speak at, and a certain kind of dynamism to their inflections and their tone, which makes it more engaging. And there's almost like a TED Talk style of talking. It's almost become a cliche, kind of a joke. In fact, there's some TED Talks you can go on there where a person will speak just pure word salad, but because he's doing it in this
Yeah.
TED
Yeah.
Talk way, what I'm telling you, even though it means nothing, you think I'm smart.
Yeah.
So you try not
Yeah.
to go
Yeah. Yeah.
there, but there is actually like a style of that.
Yeah, you don't want to feel like it's memorized,
Right.
to your point. Yeah, and I that was one thing that my previous life as a journalist, I would practice my stand ups in
Yep.
front of a mirror. I would record, go back, always go back. Always felt like I was the athlete, wannabe that was going back and watching game tape.
Right.
But it is important for that because you realize maybe you're lifting your arm for some reason at an odd point,
Or you're shifting, or
yeah, not making good eye contact,
Yep.
something along those lines. But that's interesting that and I don't think people take into account how much it helps you with everything, and not just a TED Talk, but if
Right.
you need to talk, if you're in sales, if you're needing to present to a board, I mean, the more practice you can get, the absolute better.
Well,
So
what it does is, and this is actually, it's a good advice I always give newer people, particularly people who are uncomfortable with public speaking, is the repetition creates a little bit of muscle memory, and that means you're going to be fine. And what I tend to do actually is that I will scrawl notes before I talk. They're not even going to be legible, but just the act of trying to put them to paper fires the neurons enough to kind of give me the clues. And then I do know that if I totally blank, I can look down and kind of interpret a piece of scrawl and know what I'm doing. So I've got kind of an emotional crutch there as well.
yeah, I was told one time to always have a couple of unique fillers, so
Right.
people will say and all, but if you can have something that's almost a reset, that's pretty unique to you, so when you do,
Correct.
maybe you do kind of have a little freeze moment, if you can remember that's a little trick, it kind of gets you back on to
That's
where
right.
you need to go.
That's right.
So we got away from this, and I wanted to get back to this. We're going back, talking about the region and how you're selling it. What does success look like for the greater New Orleans region over the next 5 years?
The most basic measure of success, and I don't think that anything else supplants this, is a reversal of population outmigration. If you look at the population numbers, and let's just look at them at a gross level, including births and deaths, and kind of at the top line number, you want to see the numbers beginning to go back up. And the reason is twofold. One is that is the most basic measure of success. People are voting with their feet. But also, there's a lot of path dependency to growth as well as stagnation, conversely, stagnation. If people are coming into your community, that means that your tax revenue is probably going up. And if your tax revenue is going up, you're going to have the resources to invest in your community. And the opposite is also true. And so to get out of a civic downward trend or even a civic death spiral, it can require something as dramatic as what Dan Gilbert's doing up in Detroit, where he's put in billions of dollars of investment to take the city and put it onto a different tract. That's a pretty extraordinary, form of rescue, and most places are not going to see that. So what you want to do is to get into the incremental good track of people coming back in, and then slowly that builds on itself. If you had to ask me, I mean, look, growth has its challenges. Ask the people in Nashville right now who are saying it's going too fast.
Yeah.
But if you had to deal with either the challenge of growth or the challenge of stagnation,
You want the other one. Let me ask you this: do you think that though, do you start with the migration side of it and trying to keep people, or do you start with trying to attract people, or are they the same thing?
well, it's those are two sides of the same coin for sure. But what you do have to recognize, and this is actually comes back to the genomic model, is that attracting or keeping people is fundamentally not a sales process. It's about the product. What I mean by that is that if you remember the old Honda car commercials, I don't know, maybe you're too young, but like the ad was Honda, the car that sells itself. You want the community and the economy that sells itself, because the tax structure is so good. The political climate is so regular, because the schools are so good, because the amenities are so nice, that in a very natural and organic way, companies want to risk their capital and people want to raise their families. If you have that in place, you're going to win. People are going to figure it out and they're going to start showing up. If you don't have that, you can market the heck out of it and it's actually not going to work over time.
Yeah.
My kind of my the experience here that really opened my my revelatory experience here was probably about 12, 15 years ago. I was in Charlotte, and I was meeting with a guy who ran the Charlotte Regional Chamber. He was the chairman. His name was Humpy Wheeler. I'll never forget Humpy Wheeler, because Humpy Wheeler
That's a very memorable name to start off with.
and Humpy Wheeler ran the NASCAR track there. Even got to voice a car in Cars. Like, Humpy Wheeler is a big deal in the world of cars that only go left. And Humpy, in my mind, had this 12-gallon hat on and cowboy. I don't know, but I said to him at lunch at the B of A Tower in Charlotte, Charlotte, I said, Humpy, what's it like doing economic development in Charlotte these days? And he looked at me and he said, Michael, doing economic development in Charlotte's like running a laundromat. We just open our doors and people bring us their money. And I was like, wow, now I get it. That is the definition of economic development, that you've got a product that is so good and so needed that people are just bringing you their capital and their families, and your job is to figure out how to make it work. So we spend most of our time at GNO Inc. working on the environment, on the product of the region and state. And then after we have one that we feel that we can comfortably and credibly sell, then we turn to the flash of selling it.
Yeah. You've got to get the narrative right, and then you can start building all the other stuff like we talked about. Well, the last part that we like to do on our podcast is called lasting impressions. And so the way that we set it up is the internet is gone. There is no way to go search and find Michael Hecht's Wikipedia page.
Okay, good.
I think
Thank
you're also
God.
the first guy that has a Wikipedia page on as a guest. So that's gone. So you get to start though today with kind of letting people know who Michael Hecht is. So what are the three truths? What are the three things that you would most want people to know about you as you get to start today and you get to define that story?
Oh, wow. That's a big question. We should be drinking that bourbon that's over there. Going to ask me that.
We can, but I mean, if you want to twist my arm.
I would like to be known for optimism, action, and results. It's as simple as that. As somebody who's able to see possibility, catalyze partners into working towards those possibilities, and then fundamentally, I guess to borrow the term from Steve Jobs, leave a dent in the universe at the end of it, saying that something good happened, and if not but for our collective action, it might not have happened.
I think you know that without any bourbon. I'd like to see what we did with bourbon. That'll have to be the next time we get you on. Really, thanks for coming on. This is fun, and I know you got a lot going on, so I do appreciate you taking the time to come and talk.
No, Scott, appreciate you and appreciate On Path all y'all are doing for the community.
Yeah, thank you. Well, Targeted Impressions, a product of 3131 Media Solutions, a full-service advertising agency in Metairie, Louisiana. Please follow us, like this podcast, give it a review, tell a friend, all the things that help us start bringing these stories and other ones like them to you. Until next time, God bless.